I think before we start, we need to make a little clarification. I'm a bit of a gunslinger, as well as all sorts of survival strategies, tactical gear, binoculars, flashlights, and more. I have quite a lot of such goods, and the pearl of the collection is the Remington 700 rifle. It is quite legal to buy it in Russia after 5 years of owning a smooth bore. I have a couple of very good optical sights for it. One is more powerful, the other is weaker. It's not that I'm some kind of psycho, but let's just say I like to feel ready for trouble in our turbulent times. Well, this is, as I said, the backstory. And the story itself is like that. I once had a chance to rent an apartment in one of the districts of the northeastern district of Moscow. I rented it due to production needs. I was not going to stay there for a long time, so I signed the contract for a couple of months in total. The apartment was on the top floor of a 12-story building. The view from the windows would have been gorgeous, if not for one but. Opposite, about 200 meters away, stood another 12-story building, and besides it, I saw almost nothing from my windows. My apartment was cheap. There was not even a TV there. I wasn't going to get the internet there either. Anyway, I'm leaving soon, so there wasn't much entertainment, frankly. Unfortunately, the work turned out to be less than I thought, so I spent the evenings reading, and then, when it got dark, I took up my rifle and played peepers. I came up with this entertainment for myself on the third day of living in that apartment. I was setting up the scope, looking through it at the street, estimated the distance to different objects, accidentally looked into a couple of windows and somehow got carried away. Then I dragged a desk to the window, sat my Remington with optics on it, and through a gap in the drawn curtains began to study the residents of the opposite house. Since then, I've spent almost every evening like this. Of course, you can judge me and I will agree with you. There is nothing good in looking at people through the crosshairs, albeit an unloaded gun, but damn it, once I tried, I could not stop. Opposite house was just a collection of colorful characters, and if the man from the 6th floor, who watches porn every evening, quickly got bored, then the small karate kid from the 9th, who arranged a daily merciless workout in the kitchen, and the young couple from the 7th became my favorites. This couple, by the way, was very hot. In the few days that I watched them, they did this in all ways known to me and clearly were not going to stop. They also didn't seem to know how to turn off the lights in their bedroom. I could watch them endlessly. I hoped to learn a lot from them. There were also alcoholics, interesting only during their drunken fights, divorcees with children, more or less normal families, in general, a lot of things, but the story is not about them. Once, during the next peeping, I accidentally looked up the window on the 8th floor, which I had not looked into much before. I saw an almost empty room, illuminated by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. The door was tightly closed. In the corner was a bed on which a man was sitting in a classic yoga position. He caught my attention with his immobility, and I decided to watch him. The man sat with his back to the window and looked at the wall. He was very thin, pale and tall. His completely bald head seemed disproportionately large. He was not wearing a t-shirt and pants. I looked at him for 5 minutes, but he didn't move. I shifted my scope to the wall. He was looking at the wall. As far as I could see, was empty. No paintings, no carpets. The faded wallpaper peeled off in places. I took a look around the room. Also nothing interesting. A couple of chairs, a coffee table with a pile of newspapers, an old armchair, a small rug on the floor by the bed. On the closed door, I noticed a few incomprehensible vertical stripes, and that's it. I decided that the dude was just meditating, and you shouldn't expect any jokes from him. After which I switched to my favorite karate kid, who was just warming up before the next training session. The next day I came home from work early and immediately clung to the scope. Bastard is sitting there, in the same pose. Although, it seems he turned a little to the side now, so something is still going on there. I watched all evening, didn't even go to the toilet. He is sitting. I look into the scope, and he is sitting, looks at the wall. He seems to be barely breathing. Or it seems to me. When my eyes hurt, I gave up and went to bed. I looked again in the morning before leaving for work, without changes, so I watched him for a whole week. A couple of minutes in the morning and a few hours in the evening. From time to time his position changed a little, but how and when this happened, I did not see. One day I came back from work and saw that he had changed the sheets on the bed, and then I decided to range around the clock surveillance of the bastard. I was busy all evening, but the results satisfied me. I aimed the rifle on the bipod at the window, and with the help of a tripod brought the lens of the video camera to the eyepiece of the sight. Video will record directly to the hard drive of the laptop, so I can see what happened during the few hours that I will be at work. In the morning, I checked everything again, pressed record on the camera and left the house. On the first day, I was disappointed. The camera honestly recorded everything, and the yogi honestly sat on the bed for all 8 hours of the video without moving. I barely had the patience to repeat the whole procedure the next day. The second time I got lucky. In the evening, watching the video, I saw how at 14:17 the door to the yoga room opened, and a woman entered with a tray in her hands. At first I thought that she would feed him, but there was almost nothing on the tray. All I saw was a vial and a few small boxes. The woman slowly approached the yogi and placed the tray in front of him on the bed. For a while she stood beside him and looked at him. I thought they were talking, but looking closer, I saw that her lips were not moving. Then she began to rub his left hand, and then for a few seconds she bowed tensely in front of him. It was impossible to see what exactly she was doing, as the yogi's thin back interfered, but it looked like she had given him an injection in the arm. At least that's the impression I got. Then she somehow strangely, sideways, went to the window, opened the window and lit a cigarette. Having smoked a cigarette, she closed the window, took the tray away and backed out of the room, closing the door behind her. Nothing else happened. Tearing myself away from the monitor, I glanced through the scope. Everything in the room was exactly the same as in the last frames of the recording. If not for the camera, I would never have known that someone was there. I rewatched the video. There was something strange about him, even frightening. Although, it would seem, everything is clear. There is a pale, skinny dude sitting on the bed, probably a down or something. His nurse comes in or something, does an injection, smokes a cigarette, leaves. I reviewed the video again, and further. So without deciding anything, I once again checked my ward in the site, sitting, you bastard, and went to bed. Over the next week, using my surveillance system, I found that, A, a woman with a tray enters the room once every 2 days. At about 2 to 3 p.m., she does the injection, smokes a cigarette and leaves. B, nothing else seems to be happening in the room. However, it all started to become an obsession. First, I never saw him change the sheets. Secondly, I think I understood what was strange in the woman's behavior. I saw her come into his room 3 times and never, not for a second, did she turn her back on him. I watched him for a few weeks, almost gave up on work. During this time, his sheets were changed again, but I never saw this. I don't know how it happened, if only at night when I was sleeping. I also learned that a couple of times a week a woman leaves his apartment somewhere for 30-40 minutes. I saw her leave the entrance and come back with a couple of packages. Several times I was able to follow her. She went to the nearest grocery store, and on the way back she stopped at the pharmacy. I tried to find out what she bought at the pharmacy, but she took the check with her, and I did not dare to ask the pharmacist. Once every 2 days a woman came into his room, gave him an injection, smoked a cigarette, and go out. She didn't turn her back on him for a second. I thoroughly studied his room. I thought a lot about the stripes on the door, about the peeled wallpaper. The stripes on the door are peeled paint, and it was peeled off by the same thing as the wallpaper on the walls, the nails on his hands. I had no reason to think that this was so, but I could not find any other explanation. He started to scare me. I looked at him through the scope, stared at the back of his head for hours, and he just sat on his bed in the corner. It was especially creepy to see how small children in the neighboring apartment were playing and jumping on the sofa and behind the wall. In fact, a couple of meters from them, this freak was sitting on the bed. I knew I needed to do something, but I couldn't think of what. Call the police, and what to tell them. Well, they will come. Ring the doorbell, nobody will not open it, and then what? I'm all exhausted. I searched through the entire internet, but apart from the standard horror stories, I did not find anything. Although one paste, it seems to me, still had something to do with this. He tried to find out something from the inhabitants of the house, but it seems that no one knew anything about him. In the end, I decided on the most idiotic act of my life. I was well prepared. I took a couple of my best knives, a traumatic revolver, a mask to hide my face in case of emergency, lockpicks, a flashlight, firecrackers to distract attention, a smoke bomb. I stuffed it all into my pockets, trying not to look suspicious and not to rumble at every step. Then I went out into the street, sat on a bench at the entrance and began to wait. If the cops decided to get to the bottom of me at that moment, I would have so many problems. Sometimes I regret that it didn't happen. The most funny thing was that then, sitting on a bench, I had no idea what I was going to do. After about 40 minutes, I saw that the woman from that apartment left the house and went her usual way towards the store. I had exactly half an hour. I got up and went to the entrance from which she left. Went up to the 8th floor. The door to the hall was not locked, and I opened it. I found myself in the middle of a dimly lit corridor, one end of which was incredibly cluttered. Along the walls were metal headboards, a bicycle without wheels, skis, sleds, some dusty boxes, fragments of wooden furniture, and there was also a wheelchair. For some reason it caught my attention. Estimating that the door to the apartment I was interested in was located just at the cluttered end of the corridor, I held my breath and moved there. Here it is. Brown oak-leather upholstered door, apartment number 41. Doorknob, keyholes, peephole, nothing special. I stopped a couple of meters from the door, trying to collect my thoughts. What am I doing here? What am I going to do? I had a big tremor. I just stood there and looked blankly from the door to the wheelchair and back again. At some point, I suddenly realized that in addition to my heavy sniffing, I heard something else. I held my breath and listened. The sound came from behind the door of apartment 41 and was clearly approaching. Before I knew what it was, the sound stopped. There was a tense silence. The thoughts in my head were moving slowly. It dawned on me that I heard his shuffling footsteps. He went to the door and is now standing behind it. Damn, he's looking at me through the peephole. At that moment, the doorknob began to spin rapidly, and the door seemed to have been heavily attacked from the inside, judging by the way it creaked. I, as you put it here, laid some bricks and, to the best of my ability, ran out of there. How I got down from the 8th floor, I don't remember. I can say one thing, very quickly. Only running out of the entrance, I was able to pull himself together. I had the sense not to immediately run to my house, but to make a detour around the block to confuse the tracks. I was at home in 10 minutes. Without taking off the shoes, I ran into the room, grabbed a rifle, aimed at his window. And this is where I got really scared. He stood at the window, scratching the glass with his hands, and I'll be damned if he wasn't staring right at me. I only saw him for a second, but what I saw I will never forget. A thin, elongated body, bones showed through the pale skin, long arms with crooked fingers scratched on the glass, on a huge, almost white, hairless head, a tiny, ugly, noseless face, two large, dark eyes and a mouth without lips. His hands moved. His mouth opened and closed, leaving what marks on the glass, and his eyes looked exactly at me. I just felt that look. You know, although at that moment my brain was paralyzed with horror, my body knew what to do. As if in a dream, I recoiled from the window and rushed to the closet where I had a box of cartridges. About 10 seconds later I returned with a loaded Remington. I didn't care what happened after. Pulling the shutter, I jumped up and quickly took aim at the window. In the crosshairs, I saw only swaying, tightly drawn curtains. I moved out of the apartment on the same day. I paid the owner. He did not ask questions. I was grateful to him for that. Concentrating on work, I lived for several months. Everything began to be forgotten. Sometimes I remember him. I understood why he was sitting facing the wall. They put him like that, especially so that he does not see other people. Who is he? I don't know. Is he dangerous? I think he definitely is. Sometimes I see him in my dreams. He scratches at my door, and I look at him through the peephole, and my rifle in these dreams misfires over and over again. I don't like that he saw me then. Am I afraid? I have a gun and I can take care of myself, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't scared.